I was watching the judge sentence Tina Peters. I didn't watch the arguments, the oral arguments back and forth. Tina, I believe, was representing herself in presenting the arguments, asking for not clemency, but probation. I started listening to the judge render his judgment, and I was convinced I was listening to the prosecutor plead. It was so wildly hyperbolic, wildly unprofessional. This judge getting out there and saying that Tina Peters, who was accused of unlawfully influencing public servants because she was trying to get access to the server so that she, through her FBI informant dude, could mirror Dominion's server and data information, that she was accused of unlawful impersonation, a conspiracy to commit unlawful impersonation, influence of a public servant, unlawful influence. Listening to this judge berate her, tell her that she was in this only for herself. He called her a charlatan. And then he goes on to issue his sentencing. There were 8 convictions, 3 for unlawful influence of a public servant. Then there was the conspiracy to commit identity theft, I believe, where she was found guilty, but not actual impersonation, criminal impersonation. And he's rendering these orders and these sentences 3.5 years, 3.5 years to be run consecutively, not concurrently. Then throws on a 15 months for the conspiracy to commit identity theft, I think, concurrently. So that's 3.5 concurrent, another 3.5. Sorry, consecutive. Then another 15 months consecutive. And it's the most insane thing I've ever heard in my life. He said to Tina Peters that what she did was worse than the violence that his court sees in Ohio, not in Ohio, in Colorado. Sorry, Robert, can you explain the discretion that judges have to issue sentences concurrently versus consecutively? Tell the world what you think of what this judge did to Tina Peters, regardless of what you think about what Tina Peters did herself.
Well, historically, the right to sentence defendants in a criminal case was to be determined by a jury. In my view, that's what the Constitution intended. People remember the famous "Give me liberty or give me death." Patrick Henry led to the acquittals of a tobacco farmer who wasn't paying the tobacco tax. What they don't know is it wasn't for an acquittal. It was for the jury to issue the lowest possible sentence because the jury controlled sentencing. Judges don't want anybody to know this, that they have hijacked and usurped to themselves and stolen power that belonged to juries, not to them. Judges should have no such power over sentencing. All sentencing should be determined, like the guilt of the crime, like the law itself, by juries. Judges took 2 things away from juries. First, they took away sentencing power. Second, they took away any question that they called a legal question. If it was a legal question, magically jurors just couldn't have that power. Now, you won't find any constitutional originalism to justify this, but many of the judges on the right love usurping power for themselves too. And consequently, they have been intellectually dishonest about conceding this fact. One of the big objections that led to the revolution, that led to the Bill of Rights, was these kind of colonial administrator type officials usurping decisions about guilt, usurping decisions about fines, usurping decisions about sentences. He's just another illustration, one more example why judges should never have this power. But because courts decide for themselves what power they have, there's nobody there to discipline. Remember, this is the same Colorado court system that initially, its Supreme Court wanted to remove Trump from the ballot on patently frivolous arguments. The only people that are interfering with civil rights, civil liberties, and election integrity in Colorado are the judges themselves, and they're the ones who belong in prison like this scumbag does. He should be impeached, then he should be indicted for civil rights violations, and then he should have his rear end put in prison for 9 years, because that's what a constitutionally honorable country was. This man is a disgrace to the bench, but he represents what liberal Democrats represent on the bench. And he represents the dangers of ever giving judges any power at all, because they will abuse it, because they always have. And this judge is just the latest example of that. His sentence is insane. And here's a judge who's going to let rapists walk, murderers walk, drug dealers walk, pedophiles walk, because he cries deeply for them. But someone who challenged the election integrity in Colorado, 9 years in state prison because he doesn't like her speech, as he was stupid enough to say from the bench.
Let me just illustrate that you're not being hyperbolic in what you're saying about letting the rapists out. He literally said in his sentencing diatribe that Tina had none of the other factors, the basically mitigating factors. She wasn't a drug addict. She knew what she was doing, as if to say, like, the rapists don't know what they're doing, or the drug addicts, or the alcoholics, or the gang members. Well, they're a product of their environment. She doesn't have those defenses going for her. FYI, people, out of Colorado, we're Colorado. The average sentence for a convicted rapist is anywhere from 4 to 14 years, and it's typically lower. It was like 4 to 8 years. So Tina Peters, nonviolent, first time
69-year-old woman
69-year-old
who
woman, Gold
believed
Star
she
mom.
was exposed, whatever you think of her actions, believed she was blowing the whistle on corruption and fraud in the election of 2020, is going to serve twice as long as the average rapist in Colorado. And this judge is proud of that fact.
People were picking up on that, and I can't say that I picked up on it the first time, where the judge said, he said basically, it doesn't protect your words. I think that's almost verbatim what he said. What
Yeah.
she did, it does not protect her words that came out of her mouth.
I know.
And
I mean, this is why we took the Owen Schroyer case, the 1776 Law Center, on behalf of Owen Schroyer to the Supreme Court, try to get the Supreme Court to take it, because judges were starting to sentence people based on their political beliefs, based on their political speech. That's not supposed to happen. That First Amendment prohibits it. But once the Supreme Court sat on its lazy rear end like it usually does and didn't take the case, judges like this feel empowered. Judges like this are like, all right, now we can get going. I mean, the people interfering in the election are judges. The people trying to contaminate our election are judges more than anyone else. It was the judges who failed to discharge their duties to hold meaningful election contests in Georgia. It was the judges of the Supreme Court of the United States that failed to take the original action that was joined by a near majority of states and a near majority of members of the House of Representatives and a bunch of senators and leading legal scholars, and they were too scared to take the case. And the only Alito and Thomas dissented from the failure to take the case. And all that is done is allowed these liberal authoritarians that will feel all sympathy in the world for the sickest psychos on the planet, because they're part of the dependent constituencies and classes that they get to control and govern, and are enraged by the independent people who expose the corruption and fraud of the system. And that's why these judges that are supposedly liberal judges are some of the nastiest, most vicious, most vile, fascistic authoritarians you'll find on the planet. The gap between a fascist and a communist is a very thin line. They're going to weaponize their power, their control, to imprison their political dissidents and political critics, and be proud of it, and want to brag about it to the world, and expect that they will be cheered, declared heroes, and be given special foundation scholarships and grants and all the rest for being these great, noble jurists who stood up against the election whistleblowers, which is what she was and who she is. By the terms of the sentencing itself in the law of Colorado, he radically deviated from it. And he was so explicit in his political prejudice, and so explicit in wanting someone punished for their speech, and as a message to deter other people's speech, that even the Commie Court of Colorado are probably going to have to overturn this verdict and overturn this sentence, because he also rigged the entire trial so she couldn't present a defense.
I also want to highlight, because the retort or the steel man is, "Oh, Viva, she got rightfully convicted by a jury of her peers." To which I want to say, like, convicted by the jury versus sentenced by the politically motivated judge are two very different things.
Well, not only that, it confuses power with principle. Never confuse the two. I'm a big champion of the right of a jury trial and of the jury having more power than judges. That does not mean every jury decision is correct. If you defer to what a judge says it is, or what a jury says it is, then you have a completely subjectivist interpretation. By that definition, the law has no objective meaning, and truth has no objective meaning, and justice has no objective meaning. You're a relativist at heart. And so unless that's what you truly philosophically embrace, then it's not a position that's consistent with any belief that there's objective truth, that there's objective justice, that there's objective law that can be objectively discernible. So the fact she was convicted tells me nothing. The only thing that the whole case tells me is it was a rigged trial in front of a biased jury pool by a judge who was preordained to rig the sentencing. in ways that contravene the principles of law governing all three.
People say she was rightly or she was convicted by a jury, so you got nothing to complain about. And I'm like, first of all, sentenced by the judge is different. But then the other question is, if a jury knew that they were going to be responsible for having a woman sentenced to basically life in prison, given her age, if she serves this entire bullshit sentence, would they have found her guilty in the first place? So when they want to find someone guilty, if they handle the sentencing, it's a lot easier to control by way of an outcome, as opposed to under these circumstances, they say guilty. I mean, well, I want to bring up Jenna Griswold.
Even that liberal jury would have gone with a very low sentence.
Absolutely.
And that's why the judge doesn't want, that's why the judges took away the jury's power to sentence. They want to control that extraordinary power. They don't want ordinary people to have it.
And I would have said the jury might have still convicted her because this is Jenna Griswold's Colorado, and we're dealing with like a jury pool that might be as biased as DC. But they would nobody in their right mind would have sentenced her to 9 years. I mean, nobody in their right mind. 6 months would have been excessive already. Robert, entertain me. I just want to play the first minute and 2 seconds, including the judge's dramatic pause. As much awareness that can be raised for Tina Peters right now, you can think she's guilty all you want. People are saying she didn't really expose egregious election fraud because nobody really looked into it. But she's clearly being punished for what she attempted to do. Listen to a minute and 2 seconds of this. Dramatic pause.
You have no qualms with violating the court's orders because you're innocent, because you didn't do anything wrong. You were just doing your job. You have no problem trying to kick an officer. Your explanation about what happened is preposterous. It's on video. You have no problem lying to officers. It's happened multiple times. They're recorded conversations. It's just more lies. No objective person believes them. No, at the end of the day, you cared about the jets, the podcasts, and the people fawning over you. You abdicated your position as a servant to the Constitution, and you chose you over all else. Yes, you are a charlatan, and you cannot help but lie as easy it is for you to breathe. You betrayed your oath for no one other than you.
It's a whole hell of a lot of confession through projection, Robert.
That's exactly what it is. And anytime people think that the outcome justifies what took place, that means you support the ending the verdict in To Kill a Mockingbird. And you're basically a moral reprobate at that point. Anybody who celebrates a jury verdict merely because it's a jury verdict, or celebrates a sentence merely because it was someone in power issued it, is a kind of a disgusting human being, really.